What's up everyone, it's King Moosh here with JCross X to welcome you all back for episode 3 of Unit Overview. In this series we'll be analyzing all the playable units in Fire Emblem 3 houses regarding their recruitment requirements, personal abilities, stats, spell lists, and everything in between to determine their strengths and limitations as a unit in your army. We'll also be providing potential class recommendations for all these units, as well as ranking them on a tier list at the end of our analysis. These videos are generally gameplay focused, so we do our best to avoid story spoilers, but we always advise you to watch with discretion anyways, and if you haven't played 3 houses yet, we highly recommend that you do.
This episode will be focused on Hubert von Vestra of the Black Eagles house. Hubert becomes one of many playable units in this game after the prologue battle if you make the decision to teach his house at the very start of your journey. He's available for most missions aside from Chapter 11, under the assumption you choose the Crimson Flower route. Just like Edelgard, Hubert is not recruitable out of house either, being designated as one of Edelgard's closest confidants. If you pick the Black Eagles and do not meet certain requirements to trigger the Crimson Flower route, you'll lose access to Hubert and Edelgard as units late into White Clouds in Chapter 11, and they will no longer be available for the rest of the Silver Snow route. Just like the Edelgard episode, I'll mention the route requirements here if you're curious with the least amount of spoilers that I can, but you can skip ahead if you wish. Firstly, you need to have Edelgard's support at C+, which by this point isn't too hard at all. Then, you must talk to Edelgard while exploring the monastery before the end of Chapter 11, where she will ask you to come with her to Embar to witness her being coordinated as the new Emperor of Adrestia. Afterwards, you must choose to defend Edelgard at the end of the Chapter 11 mission, and your boy Hubert will be there to help you out. Hubert is one of many crestless units in this game, as such he cannot use Hero's Relics without incurring a damage penalty. Although he isn't recruitable out of house, we still will give you a few things to help raise his support. His favorite gifts include the board game, coffee beans, the history of Fodlan, and of course owl feathers, which are well liked by everyone. His favorite types of tea are the Cinnamon Blend, Dagda Blend, and of course the Freshfeld Blend given how close his ties are to that of Edelgard's noble house. Lastly, for his lost items, his are the Noxious Handkerchief found after Chapter 4 in the training grounds, the Hesfeld Tresty found after Chapter 7 along the path north of the stables, and the Folding Razor found after Chapter 9, once again in the training grounds.
Hubert's personal ability is Officer Duty. It's a very simple ability that just passively increases the might of all offensive gambits by 5. I'm just going to cut to the chase and say that this is a pretty mediocre ability. There are some abilities that are basically completely useless or possibly even a little detrimental, so it's not one of the absolute worst ones, but it's still not very good. Extra damage is always nice, but the main purpose of offensive gambits isn't damage, it's the ability to rattle enemies to keep them locked in place. For that, the important thing is actually hitting the gambit, not the amount of damage it deals, and Officer Duty doesn't affect gambit accuracy at all. The extra damage is not going to scale particularly well into the late game either, since it's a flat 5, so it will gradually make less of a difference over time as enemies get higher HP and defensive stats. This also has no effect on utility gambits like Stride or Impregnable Wall, which are some of the most useful gambits in the game. For that reason, you're going to want to equip Hubert with battalions that have magic damaging gambits such as Resonant Lightning or Group Flames. It can also stack with Authority Prowess for even more might on gambits, which is pretty good synergy.
Looking at Hubert's skill levels, he actually has a decent amount of things going for him. First, we can take a look at the Banes, one of which is Faith, which doesn't matter too much as you'd likely train Reason instead given how mediocre his Faith spell list is. His only other Banes to mention are Axes and Flying. Since he is rarely used as a physical unit, this isn't too big of a deal, especially since he doesn't get any magical axe combat arts. As for Flying, being a male already restricts him from a few good flying classes, and since he is most likely not going to be on a Wyvern, this Bane isn't too impactful for him specifically. Moving on, we have his budding talent in Lances, which grants him the esteemed magical combat art Frozen Lance once you do 12 teaching sessions in Lances with him. Although he isn't the best user of this art compared to someone like Flayn or Marianne, it's still good to have regardless. As for boons, he has a couple solid ones that make leveling his important skills easier. Of course he has one in Reason, which is very important given his offensive spells are quite strong and something you should pick up as soon as you can. He also starts with a D rank, which means he has Reason level 1 and the dark magic spell Miasma. This spell has slightly higher might than some of the lower weight spells at 5, but trades that for being a little less accurate, which can be somewhat annoying earlier on. Still, it's a solid spell to start with. Aside from that, he starts with E+ bows and also has a boon for them, which is definitely helpful for him given the fact that he mainly uses dark magic spells as a means of attack, and given their inconsistent hit rates, picking up hit plus 20 from Mastering Archer is recommended and made easier thanks to this boon. He also has a few bow combat arts at his disposal, which we'll talk about later. Lastly, we have a very appreciated boon to Authority with a starting rank of E+. Not only does he get a few solid abilities from this, but having a boon in Authority just means you'll be able to use higher tier battalions earlier, which is very much appreciated given how much they impact gameplay.
Looking at Hubert's base stats, they're good in the most important area, but do have some obvious weaknesses. His base magic of 12 is the absolute highest in the game, which is great. However, in direct contrast, at 22 HP he is tied for the lowest base HP in the game with only Lysithia. Paired with only 4 defense, he's extremely frail on the physical side. His 7 res is a bit more respectable, but it's just average among magic units and doesn't really stand out. He has 6 dex, luck, and charm, as well as 7 speed, which are all solid and perfectly serviceable for the early game. Finally, he has only 6 strength, which is obviously not great, but it's about what you'd expect from a magic unit, and it's not the worst in the game or anything. Moving on to growth rates, the standout is once again magic at 55%. It's tied with Hanneman and Flane for the second highest in the game, and only slightly behind Lysithea and Constance, who has 60%. He has 45% growth rates in both dex and speed, as well as 35% luck, which are all average and perfectly fine. In fact, his speed is a little above average for a magic unit. As you could probably expect, his strength and physical bulk are his worst areas, with only a 30% strength growth rate, 25% in defense, and 35% HP. On the magic side of his bulk, his 40% res growth is pretty good. Finally, he has 35% charm growth, which isn't that bad, but combined with his base, he feels very average in terms of charm. This is unfortunate for a unit whose personal ability is entirely based around gambits. I do wish he had better charm, but he has great magic and pretty good dex, which are going to be the most important stats for reasons we will soon discuss.
Hubert only has a few unique combat arts aside from the standard ones. To start with, I'll briefly mention Frozen Lance again. It's what he acquires from his budding talent, and for the cost of 4 durability, this art will increase might by 3, hit by 5, and most importantly, it scales off magic damage instead of strength while also adding 30% of a unit's dex to damage too, just for good measure. For starters, I wanted to clarify earlier on why I said it wouldn't see as much use on him compared to someone like Flane and Marianne who also get it, and the simple reason is because he is male. Some of the best classes to take advantage of Frozen Lance with are Falcon Knight and Darkflyer due to their ability to canto out to inaccessible or terrain-dense tiles after dealing hefty damage without having to worry about their physical fragility too much. Hubert has access to neither of these classes, and while Paladin and Dark Knight get the job done just fine, Hubert's spell list is very strong, and I'd rather not get rid of it by throwing him in Paladin. As for Dark Knight, it's definitely one of his better magical class options, but as we have mentioned numerous times in these series, Crimson Flower, the route he's exclusive to, is pretty unfriendly to cavalry, so it makes this art specifically a bit harder to use. That's fine though, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a good pickup regardless. As for others, he only has 2 more, which are both of his bow combat arts. He has Heavy Draw at C+ bows, which for the cost of 5 durability, it increases might by 8 and hit by 10. This is actually pretty solid in a vacuum, but unless you have a magic bow to make this combat art scale off as magic instead, it honestly won't do much damage. The same also applies to Schism Shot, a combat art he gets at A rank. For 3 durability, this art boosts might by 4, hit by 15, with the added benefit of having extra tile of range and inflict a -5 res on an enemy struck by this attack for 1 turn. While the -5 to res isn't too impactful aside from maybe on certain boss enemies or monsters, the extra range is nice, and if it doesn't affect your hit rate too much, you can use this over Curve Shot if you desire. Again, I'd only ever use both of these if you have acquired a magic bow and gave it to Hubert, and maybe you want to focus on making him more of a magic sniper build instead of taking advantage of a spell list on another class. If you do give him a magic bow though, then you can definitely achieve some pretty good results with these arts.
Looking at Hubert's dependent abilities list, he has a fairly good set. All of them come from his authority rank, which makes them pretty easy to unlock due to his boon and slightly higher base skill level. His first ability is Rally Magic at the D rank, which allows Hubert to use the Rally command to grant +4 magic to one adjacent ally for a full turn. This is one of the most useful rally abilities, and it's very helpful that he can access this so early. It can lead to extra damage or healing output, and could even grant an extra tile of range to spells like Warp and Rescue, or 2 extra tiles for Physic. The only unfortunate thing about this is that he would arguably be the best recipient to this rally in the Black Eagles, so it's a shame he can't use it on himself, but he can still definitely get value out of it in the early game by rallying Dorothea or Linhardt. Moving on, he gets Battalion Wrath, another great ability at the C rank, which raises his crit rate by 50% whenever an enemy initiates combat with him, and his Battalion Endurance is at 1/3 of its max or below. As good as this is, it's difficult to use on Hubert since he prefers to use his magic staff for damage rather than strength, so he can't really take advantage of killer weaponry. He does get Death as a high crit rate spell, but he only gets 4 uses of it, so trying to enemy phase with Battalion Wrath isn't very consistent on him. Also, his preferred melee weapon type is lances, so he won't get a magic lance he can use for enemy phasing until near the end of the game, unlike sword or axe users. At the C+ rank, he gets Rally Resistance, which grants +4 res for a turn when using Rally, and if you pair it with Rally Magic or any other rally, it will apply both effects at the same time whenever you choose to rally. This can make his rally a bit more efficient, but overall, this is a lot less useful than Rally Magic and isn't very necessary. At rank A, he gets Battalion Desperation, which like Battalion Wrath, only activates when his Battalion Endurance is at 1/3 of its max or below. However, it applies when Hubert initiates combat rather than the enemy, and rather than the crit rate increase, it grants the Desperation effect. This means that if Hubert is going to double the enemy, the attacks will come out in succession rather than letting the enemy counterattack in between. This seems good since Hubert has pretty high speed growth for a mage. However, in practice, he's actually one of the least likely mages to double enemies since dark magic spells are heavier on average, and more importantly, he can't master Pegasus Knight to get Darting Blows since he's male. Finally, at the S rank, he gets Rally Speed, which allows you to grant +4 speed with the Rally command. It would definitely be a lot more useful early on, but it's still a really good rally. It's much more viable for a final build than Rally Resistance if you're willing to put in the effort to unlock it.
As we have hinted at a few times, Hubert is quite the offensive arsenal with his spell list. First though, I want to talk about his Faith spell list, which is comically bad. Aside from getting Heal and Nosferatu with D and D plus Faith like every other unit in this game, he only gets one more spell on his list, which is Recover at C Faith. Honestly, this is probably for the best, since if you had to push further past C despite him having a Faith Bane, that could get pretty bothersome. Might have been worth it if it was something like Rescue though. Regardless, he at least has a good spell list on the recent side of things. Hubert is one of the dark magic users in this game, and as such, his entire list is nothing but dark magic spells. The one he starts with is the one I talked about earlier, being Miasma, a solid spell with 5 might and 80 hit. It's a fine starting spell with the only potential issue being the accuracy, especially with how much to boost it in the first few missions. His next spell comes early at D+, being Mire, an invaluable pickup so early on. While it only has 3 might, it has the added benefit of an extra tile of range, which could be super helpful at the start of a playthrough when movement is so limited. It has 8 uses as well, which is a fair amount, allowing Hubert to reliably chip away at enemies from a distance, while also allowing follow-up from other allied units given that the spell has the added benefit of decreasing the target's defense by 5 for a turn. Next we have Banshee, a spell new to the series in this game. It's a solid upgrade to Miasma, going from 5 might to 9, whilst also bolstering an added 5 to crit and the bonus effect of reducing enemy movement by 1 for a turn assuming this attack lands. Next up we have Death at B Reason. Although the spell only has 6 might, which is less than Banshee, it also has the added effect of raising crit by 20 and having an extra tile of range. Very similar to the black magic spell Thorin with a little less base might and 10 more crit by comparison. Lastly at A Reason, Hubert unlocks yet another new dark magic spell in this game, being Dark Spikes. It bolsters a solid 80 hit and 13 might with the added benefit of being effective against cavalry foes, basically sentencing any of them to death if they are hit by this attack. Overall, while Hubert's Faith spell list is obviously one of the worst in the game, his Reason spell list is great and has a variety of different dark magic spells with unique effects and utility that combined with his high base magic will cause him to be a pretty potent magical threat throughout most of a playthrough.
Hubert's most significant strength is his magic damage output, which is among the absolute highest in the game. This can be partially credited to his Reason spell list, which in our opinion has an argument for being the overall best in the game, though there are definitely a few other contenders. The main selling points of his Reason spell list are his 3 range spells. He has access to both Mire and Death, and he gets Mire extremely early, which is really useful for the early game, for similar reasons to why Curse Shot is so good. In the late game, you can even stack these with things like Dark Magic range +1 from his Reason rank, and the Caduceus Staff for Thyrsus to boost his range further, though do be aware that he will take damage after combat from using Thyrsus due to lacking a crest. Though he doesn't get Hades, Dark Spikes is still pretty strong as a nuke option, and an even better nuke option is something completely separate from his spell list, Frozen Lance. This is probably the overall best magic damage and combat art in the game, especially on a unit with very good magic and solid decks like Hubert, and he can unlock it very early since it's just from his budding talent. While offensive spells often struggle to pick up kills in late game maddening, Frozen Lance scales a lot better, and so Hubert can still consistently one-round enemies even in the final chapters. To add on to his damage output even further, he has a Might Spore with Edelgard which applies at any length attack. His Authority boon also helps his damage output, because he can more quickly access higher ranked battalions that grant greater increases to his magical attack. On the topic of battalions, starting at Chapter 12, Hubert becomes automatically equipped with the Vestra Sorcery Engineers Battalion, so you can only obtain this battalion if you have him. It's a very good magic battalion in general, but also a great option for him specifically. It grants a +7 boost to magic attack at max level, and its gambit is the previously mentioned Resonant Lightning, which can deal very high damage especially when factoring in his personal ability Officer Duty. It even grants a +7 charm buff at max level, which can make landing Resonant Lightning more reliable. You also need to have Hubert in order to access the Darkness Beneath the Earth paralog, and the most notable reward of this paralog battle is the Arrow of Indra, which is a lance that scales off magic and has a range attack. This is a great weapon for Hubert specifically, since he already wants to use lances for Frozen Lance, so I would definitely recommend doing this paralog if you're planning on using him.
Hubert is a solid unit, but he does have a fair amount of weaknesses that warrant discussion. As we mentioned before, he has a Faith Bane and a very poor Faith spell list, so aside from the secondary effects of his dark magic as well as his rallies, he doesn't have too many options for utility. This is less of a problem for Hubert as it would have been for some other characters, as he has a great Reason spell list and his magic damage output remains pretty consistent throughout the game, but it does take away one of the few advantages of being a magic focused character in the first place. This leads into another set of traits that restrict his potential as a unit. The obvious is the fact that he's a male mage, so no Gremory, no Darkfire, and no Valkyrie. Valkyrie in particular would have been a nice option to have, since what is basically a non-existent Faith spell list and having a Reason spell list solely containing dark magic spells, Warlock and Bishop aren't really good options for him. This is why we are thankful that Dark Bishop exists, as it's basically his only option for spell casting in advanced stage. He does have some other appealing options like Magic Bow Sniper and spamming Frozen Lance as a Paladin, but I think it's definitely fair to say that he's been limited in the advanced stage due to a couple factors. Just stacking more unfortunate circumstances for Hubert, it's really not great that some of his best class options are for Cavalry given that he is solely locked behind Crimson Flower. I know we are basically beating a dead horse with this, but the Cavalry penalties make using those classes in Crimson Flower relatively suboptimal. It really does suck, since he would have fared a lot better in Azure Moon, for instance. Another limitation of his gender is the fact that he cannot acquire Darting Blow, which is somewhat unfortunate, since his above average speed is sort of wasted, especially since dark magic spells tend to be on the heavier side too. In practice, this means he'll most likely be slower than certain female mages that have lower speed growths than him. In regards to stats, it is unfortunate he doesn't really get a good option for flying, since he's extremely frail. One decently strong physical attack is probably enough to put him out of commission in most scenarios. Lastly, we have his availability. Although technically more of an element of gameplay, you can just straight up lose him as a unit if you opt to go Silver Snow instead of Crimson Flower. Regardless of what route you take though, he will always be a bit underleveled around the time that you make your decision, since he misses the entirety of Chapter 11, regardless of where you intend to take your route.
Starting with beginner class options, the one that makes the most sense is definitely Monk. He can certify for it without any investment due to his starting reason rank, and it's the only beginner class that maintains access to his spell list. It also grants the most useful mastery ability for him out of the beginner classes, that being Magic +2, which provides a small but consistent buff to his damage. The positional combat art drawback is a nice extra bonus too that Hubert can usually keep around, since it doesn't need too many combat arts like physical units do. Moving on to intermediate classes, the most essential one for Hubert is definitely Mage. Mastering Mage grants Fiendish Blow, which increases his magic attack by 6 every time he initiates combat. That's a huge buff to his damage output and arguably the single most important ability for him to obtain. Due to his starting reason rank and boon, it's easy to certify into, and as far as class performance goes, it's actually pretty good for him. It maintains access to his spell list, and it grants him 10 uses of fire as a class ability, which is very convenient since fire is lighter and more accurate than his dark magic spells. On the topic of dark magic spells being less accurate, since Hubert can't access Valkyrie later due to being male, you will want to get the ability hit +20 by mastering Archer if playing on maddening difficulty. His bow boon makes his class easy to certify into, but you will want to unlock Frozen Lance before putting him in Archer because he loses access to his spells, so Frozen Lance becomes the only way for him to still do meaningful damage. On the topic of Frozen Lance, I also want to bring up Cavalier, which is arguably his best intermediate class in terms of combat performance. Its combination of 7 move and Canto makes it excellent for utilizing Frozen Lance. However, Cavalier doesn't allow spell usage or grant a magic growth rate modifier, and the mastery is not very worthwhile, so you may want to spend most of your time in Mage and Archer and just save Cavalier for specific battles. The final intermediate class I want to mention is Dark Mage. Honestly, I think there's little to no reason for Hubert to actually use this class over Mage. However, if you have a Dark Seal, you should consider certifying him for it just so you have access to Dark Bishop later. You don't have to actually use Dark Mage, and there's no rush to grab the certification.
When talking about advanced and master stage classes for Hubert, it's hard not to bring up what is basically his unique class, Dark Bishop. Although technically any male unit can access it, as we said in our overview of that class, there's really no other mage that would realistically want to pick it over Warlock. Speaking of Warlock, Hubert doesn't benefit from either of its class abilities, so even though the abilities of Dark Bishop are pretty negligible, it's at least better than quite literally nothing. Having access to Heartseeker is not bad, but double uses of Miasma isn't really that impactful on Hubert since he isn't always fast to double and potentially run out of Miasma casts. As for Fiendish Blow, it unfortunately cannot stack with the mastery you probably already picked up from Mage, but at least can save you a unit ability slot if you need to make room for something else in your build. The boost of +4 magic, +2 dex, and +3 res are actually not bad though, which alongside the standard +10% magic growth makes Dark Bishop not a terrible option for Hubert. As for the other advanced class options, we have Paladin. Although I said earlier I don't think discarding Hubert's spell list is the greatest idea, magic damage from spells do fall off a bit later, so if you want to maximize Frozen Lance damage on a melee unit, this would technically be the best option. Without the competition of Dark Knight yet, we generally think this is potentially his best class. However, despite the cavalry inconveniences of Crimson Flower, we think that Dark Knight is probably his best endgame class once you have access to it. Not only does he still have 6 move when dismounted, which makes dealing with unfriendly cavalry tiles a bit easier, but it has a pretty solid and well-balanced set of stat boosts that give Hubert a bit of help in the bulk department, while improving his magic damage quite substantially given the +2 to magic and access to Dark Tome Fair. Technically, Lance Fair boosted Frozen Lance will only be dealing like 3 more damage thanks to the +2 magic boost I just mentioned. This means the cost of losing a small amount of Frozen Lance damage in one move is the amped up Dark Magic spells damage with Dark Tome Fair, which I think is worth the trade-off. Not to mention, Hubert just looks fantastic as a Dark Knight. Lastly, going back to advanced classes, I will mention the Magic Sniper build I briefly covered earlier. With a Magic Bow and Hubert's high base and growth in Magic, Hunter's Volley coming off of him with a Magic Bow does some pretty good damage all things considered, and his selection of bow combat arts outside of that is decent, so you can realistically put him and leave him in there as long as you think it's a good low investment option for him thanks to his boon and bows.
Hubert is a personal favorite unit of mine, so it pains me to put him this low, but I think B tier is a fair spot for him. In my opinion, Hubert is a unit who has a lot of things going for him, but this game deals him a very poor hand. The combination of being a male Dark Mage locked exclusively the Crimson Flower route is just really unfortunate for all the reasons Jeff went over. In a game with different map design and a different class system, I think Hubert could be one of the best units, but alas, this is where he goes. Keep in mind we're still very early in the tier list, so we may end up shifting things around or adding new tiers as we get further into the series, so these placements aren't necessarily set in stone. As for the best way to build Hubert, there's a few good endgame options. For spellcasting classes, you can pick between Dark Knight or Dark Bishop, and for non-spellcasting classes, both Paladin and Sniper have their merits. Our personal go-to build on him is Dark Knight, which primarily focuses on Frozen Lance while also maintaining access to his spell list for flexibility. Fiendish Blow is the most important ability recommendation for all of these aside from Dark Bishop, which already gets it as a class ability and they can't stack. For most of these classes, Frozen Lance will be your primary nuke option, so you'll want Lance Prowess 5. The only exception is Sniper, which focuses on Magic Bow Hunter's Volley and therefore wants Bow Prowess 5 instead. For the spellcasting classes, you will definitely want Reason level 5. In the late game, you also may definitely want to equip Dark Magic Range +1 from S Reason on the spellcasting classes, and Movement +1 from A+ Riding on the cavalry classes. Dark Tome Fair from S+ Reason is great on the spellcasting classes, but you're very unlikely to unlock it since Crimson Flower only has 18 chapters. To fill out the last few slots, Hit +20 is always a good option to put on any class for consistency. Magic +2 is free extra damage, especially on Magic Bow Sniper where the boost applies twice when using Hunter's Volley. Rally Magic and Rally Speed are great utility, especially on the cavalry classes since their mobility lets them utilize it better. Finally, Authority Prowess 5 pairs well with his personal ability and can be a good fit for any class if you want the extra gambit damage. That's about all we have to say about Hubert. If you enjoyed the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment. I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. Stay tuned for the next episode of Overview, which is about the next member of the Black Eagle House, Dorothea, on JCross's channel this Saturday. Thanks for watching.
We will burn together!